All right, well, I think we're going to get started. Gary Shelton should be joining us shortly. I think he just stepped out briefly. But for those of you who I do not know, I recognize a lot of you. Thank you for coming. Happy National Healthcare Decisions Day. Today is the official day, but we have extended it into a week's long worth of activities. And for those of you joining from other institutions, thank you for watching. We are going to be talking about advanced care planning today. Oh, and I'm so sorry. My name is Nicole Loving. I'm a nurse practitioner with the Supportive Oncology Service, the palliative care team. And I'm very passionate about advanced care planning, so I'm so glad we can talk about this today. So the theme this year for National Healthcare Decisions Day is it's always too soon until it's too late. So I think when a lot of us think about advanced care planning, we think about decisions that are far in the future that we don't need to get to quite just yet. But as we know, sometimes things catch up with us, and we don't want to miss an opportunity to make our wishes known and our voices heard. So here's what we're going to be speaking about today. So we're going to define and discuss advanced care planning and advanced directives. We're going to talk about some of the advanced directives paperwork, and then we're very fortunate to hear from two real-life actual patients on their experiences about discussing advanced care planning. And we'll get to that in the second part of the talk. So why is advanced care planning important? Well, we have a lot of evidence that shows that early discussions, so long before an acute time when things are happening very quickly and we need to make decisions, early discussions about goals of care are associated with better quality of life for patients, reduced use of non-beneficial care, so that means that care ultimately that's not going to benefit the patient or really change the outcome. Enhanced goal-consistent care, so that means that care that is in line with the goals of the patient and the family. Positive family outcomes and reduced costs, which, as everyone knows, is very important for our healthcare system. What we also know is that communication about goals of care and planning for the future is a key element in helping assure that patients receive the care that they want. It also helps in alleviating the anxiety that can come with the unknown of not knowing what could happen and what could be. And additionally, communication helps in supporting families, because as we know, we care for patients, but we also care for their entire families as well. So what's the difference when we talk about advanced care planning and advanced directives? What's really the difference between the two? So advanced directives are legal documents, and we're going to get into that in a second about specifically what those look like. But advanced care planning is a process, so it's not something that's static. It's not something that's fixed in time. It's iterative, meaning it's something we're going to be coming back to over and over. So the goal of these conversations is to maybe just start talking about what's important to you, and then to come back at it after you have more lived experiences. And lots of times with our patients, as you grow older, as you have more friends and family members who are dealing with serious illness, you might notice how they dealt with the situation, and you could think for yourself, oh, I would never want that for myself. That's another opportunity to go back to these conversations and have them with your friends and family so they know what you would like. So what are some of these advanced directives? So I imagine that these are going to look familiar to some of you. These are some of the main ones that we see, but this process actually started back in the 60s. There was a lawyer in Chicago, and around that time is actually when cardiopulmonary resuscitation started to become more prevalent throughout the United States, which meant that patients were coming into the hospital and they were actually being resuscitated without any sort of conversations ahead of time, sort of a paternalism in medicine, assuming that this is what every patient would want, and then having to sort of live with the consequences. So a lawyer in Chicago decided that he would create an advanced directive form that would really allow patients' voices to be heard in moments when they really wouldn't be able to speak for themselves. So the way that these forms historically came about was really on a state-by-state basis. So each of these forms is specific to each state. There are some crossovers. Unfortunately, there's not a national document that we can all use. The closest thing to that is probably the 5 Wishes document that's up there. This document was created by the American Bar Association, and it's currently accepted in 42 states. It can still be used in the states where it's not accepted. If you fill it out to guide your care, certainly healthcare professionals that see it will appreciate all the thought that's gone into it, and will certainly use it to help guide care, but it cannot officially be used in those other 8 states. So back to the top. A healthcare proxy, that's the document that many of you are probably most familiar with. When patients come into the hospital, they actually receive paperwork that says that they've been notified about completing a healthcare proxy. Unfortunately, it doesn't mean that the paperwork gets filled out. So it's something that we as healthcare professionals like to have in the chart because it's always good to know who to speak to if, God forbid, something happens to you. We'd like to know who you'd like to make healthcare decisions on your behalf, and that's really what this document is letting us know. There are spaces on the document that tell us more specifically what you would like for your care. You can go into detail if you'd like to do that, but you do not have to. And this is a form that just needs 2 witnesses. So anybody can download it from the internet. You can just actually, in New York State, type in New York State Healthcare Proxy, and it comes right up. And then you can have anybody witness it. It's just important that the people that witness it are not the people that you have indicated that would be your proxy. You could understand why that could perhaps be a conflict of interest. And that form does not need to be notified or notarized, or taken to a lawyer. Anyone can do that. The living will, on the other hand, also indicates preferences for the care that you would like. In fact, it does so in greater detail, and that you can also name a healthcare proxy or a power of attorney within that document, and that document does need to be notarized by a lawyer. The 5 wishes we just spoke about. The nice thing about the 5 wishes too is it allows you an opportunity to really think in depth about situations that would be okay for you, situations that might not be okay for you. And part of the reason why that's important is that we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the event will be when we need to make these big decisions. So it's important that we sort of can think broadly about what's important, and we'll talk about more of that in a second. The DNR form, this is technically an advanced directive. It stands for Do Not Resuscitate. There are a number of different iterations of these forms. There's particular ones for inside the hospital. There's one for outside the hospital. And it basically indicates that if you're in an event that was an acute event where your body was in the process of dying, that you would not want to be resuscitated. And that's a complicated conversation to have, and it's something that we wouldn't necessarily have as a broad directive. It's a conversation that we would have with each individual patient based on their particular diagnosis and where they are in the course of their illness. And then a POLST and MOLST. So that's the pink form here. It stands for Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment or Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. So this is an advanced directive, but it's actually an order. So it's a physician's order, or in some states in the Pacific Northwest, in Washington, and in Oregon, actually nurse practitioners can fill this out as well. And it's actual set of orders that get signed by a clinician. And it has a lot of opportunity to really be very specific about what you would want, what would be acceptable for you and not acceptable for you. And it's bright pink for a reason. So the emergency medical technicians are being trained to look for it taped to the back of someone's door in their apartment or on their refrigerator. And it's bright, so it really catches everyone's eye. We would also keep a copy here, and then we would ask patients to carry a copy around with them. The research for POLST and MOLST orders shows that they're particularly helpful for patients who have a prognosis within the last year or so of their life. But it can be broadly used for patients at other course of their illness as well. And it's a 4-page document, so on the last 2 pages it has an opportunity for a number of signatures and dates, so you can see you can come back to it over time and update it. And again, these documents are state specific. So for example, here in the Northeast, our patients sometimes travel between states. So it's important if, say, someone's going to be in New Jersey or Connecticut, that they make sure they have advance directive that's specific for those states as well. So in New York State, the Family Healthcare Decision Act was signed into law in 2010. And this is helpful to know because if our patients don't fill out an advance directive, this is how we make, who we go to find out what the patient would like and decisions that need to be made. It did broaden the ability of the surrogate to make decisions, so the proxy to make decisions. But remember, we always ask the patient first. So these advance directive documents only go into effect if the patient cannot speak for themselves. And if that's only temporary and the patient's able to recover and speak for themselves, then we immediately return to speaking to the patient and making decisions based on that. There are certain times when patients perhaps are awake and able to engage, but they're not able to have clear conversations about what their preferences are. And in that case, then we would also go to the proxy or the surrogate decision maker. But if their patient is not able to participate in their decision making, then we go to this hierarchy here. So always the patient, like I said, and then the proxy or the surrogate is next. In certain cases, there's a court-appointed guardian. That's not relevant for every case. Then we go to the spouse or the domestic partner. And then from there, the adult children or child. Oftentimes, if there are a number of children, certainly families make decisions together as a unit, and we respect that. We do appreciate having one particular person, one specific person to look to be sort of our point of contact and to maybe sort of gather the family together, or be the point person that the family speaks to about what their preferences are to speak with our team. And then from there, a parent, a sibling, or a friend. So when we're thinking about completing advance directives, when we're thinking about what's important to us, here are some questions to sort of guide us, things to consider. How would you like to be cared for? Where would you like to be? Some people say they absolutely want to be at home. Some people say, I do not want to be at home at all. I want to be in a facility or a hospital. I don't want to burden my family members. So that's something that's important to think about. And again, also to share with your friends and your family because those are bigger conversations. Who would you want to be with you? The other side of that is who would you not want to be with you? That's important to consider as well, especially if there's strained family relationships. What does dignity mean to you? What gives your life meaning? What gives your life value? You might not be able to do some of the things that you used to do before. Say if gardening was something that was a big passion for you, but how can you bring some of that into your life now, depending on what your abilities are? And then what does quality of life look like for you? And these are really big picture things to think about, and they can change over time. So what gives you quality of life now, what gives you value now, that may change in the future. So again, that's why this is really something that we're coming back to over time. It's a process. There are a number of resources out there to help guide you. These can be really difficult conversations to have, and certainly that's one of the reasons why we don't have them. But there are a lot of resources out there, particularly available online. There are videos in a number of different languages that can be used to help start conversations. Respecting Choices at the top there, they are a wonderful group. In fact, if you listen to NPR, it was maybe 5 years ago or so, the Gunderson Health System in La Crosse, Wisconsin, that's where Respecting Choices is where they are based. 96% of the people in that town have advanced directives. And that really reflects the efforts of this group, Respecting Choices, who trained lay people in the community to start having these conversations. And that also speaks to the bigger thing, which is that these conversations, talking about advanced care planning, talking about what's important to you, it's really part of a culture change too. It's something that we in the healthcare field certainly can shy away from sometimes because they're big conversations and people think they can take a lot of time, and we don't have time for that. But really, it actually saves time, because if we have these conversations, then we know what's important to our patients, and that's how we can provide them the best care possible. Also speaking to a cultural shift and talking about these things more often, Atul Gawande's book, it was at the top of the New York Times bestseller list. A lot of you may be familiar with that. Paul Kalanithe's book, When Breath Becomes Air, another wonderful book that talks about the importance of thinking about planning for the future, particularly when someone has a serious illness. The Conversation is a great book written by Dr. Volandes, who's a clinician, about his experience taking care of people and talking about advanced care planning. He does use end of life in the title, and certainly that is an opportunity to discuss these things, but anybody can have a conversation where they talk about what's important to them. And we encourage everybody to have at least a document, a healthcare proxy document filled out to let us know if, God forbid, something were to happen to you, who would we talk to? I have one filled out, and we have a copy of them here, so perhaps after this talk, if you do not have one filled out, you would be so inspired to fill one out for yourself and share it with your family member or your friends or whoever it is in particular that you have indicated would be your proxy. So once you've filled out the paperwork, where does it go? And this is important when we talk about, for our patients, what do we tell them to do with it? So we keep a copy in our electronic medical record. We give a copy to patients, and then we ask our patients to give a copy to the person that they've named as their decision maker. Another good person to give a copy to is your primary care provider, your attorney if you filled out a living will. There is something called a U.S. Living Will Registry, and that is an online registry. I think it costs maybe $50 or $60. It's newer. It's not that commonly used, but that doesn't mean it won't be in the future. And that's a place where registries about living wills can be stored. And then the idea is that in a situation, clinicians would be able to sort of log in and pull it up. But I don't think it's that widely used yet. Certainly can keep a copy in your wallet with your important papers. And then something that I think is going to be more common and that we can't forget are social media and virtual assets. So making sure that you have a list somewhere of all your usernames and passwords, because it's important to have, for your loved ones, whoever your proxy is, to have access to your accounts to be able to do the things that need to be done. And then social media is, depending on what generation you are, very important to people. And some people would perhaps, for example, on Facebook, they would want a memorial page to go up in their honor. And some people would say, take it down, I don't want anything on there. So that's an important thing too when you think about dignity and meaning. So there's a word cloud here. These are some of the words that come up when people think about advanced care planning and advanced directives. So I'm sure, on looking at this, that there are 1 or 2 words that have sort of caught your eye and stood out to you. So I would encourage you to use those words to begin a conversation about advanced care planning with your surrogate, with your loved ones, to talk about what's important to you and plans for the future. So now we are going to hear from our patients. Peggy and Jean-Claude and Gary will be facilitating a conversation to talk more about their experiences in talking about advanced care planning. So thank you.
We'll leave the word cloud up on the screen because we may reference that and think a little bit more about it. It's always interesting to think about a day or a week that we celebrate something, that we bring attention to something. Mother's Day. We don't not think about our mother 364 other days of the year, right? So today is an opportunity to think about healthcare decisions, but it doesn't mean that we didn't talk about them yesterday and we won't be talking about them tomorrow. Actually, we now have a week long of the Healthcare Decisions Day week so that we can sort of bring attention to, but not that we don't have interest in these conversations all the time. We want to inspire you, we want to educate, and as we all know, we should be as autonomous and make our decisions for ourselves, and how can we do that if we don't have all the knowledge and skill and education that we can get? And as healthcare providers, obviously, that's part and parcel why we exist. Welcome to all of the enterprise who are watching from a distance, and today we will be recording this, so I'd like to say thank you all for being here in this very important initiative. We have Peggy Matthew and we have Jean-Claude Noël to assist us in some of the making this real conversation. As Nicole mentioned, she has a healthcare proxy form signed. I'm not going to ask around who the rest of us might, but we know that there are some of us actually that do have. I would say it should be matter of fact. We should have these conversations when we're young and strong and viable, be it that we may have a life-limiting illness, but it hasn't yet shown its face to make us think we really should make these decisions. We should be thinking about education and where we want to go with this. And as we mentioned, and as Nicole pointed out, in the state of New York, it doesn't have to be husband, wife, mother, daughter, grandchild. It can be next door neighbor, it can be best friend, that's your healthcare agent. And I think that's very important because sometimes those are the people who listen to us when we have these conversations, and they will be the ones to say, wait guys, that's not what Gary said. All right? So I wanted to kind of get a thought from Jean-Claude and Peggy. When these conversations were initiated in your lives, and you're free to share any of your story, how did you, or how was it presented to make this not so scary, to kind of, this is something we should all be having a conversation about?
Well, they're not, we move always as patients, or when we're not patients, from the emotional space to the rational space. And I personally found that dealing with rational issues such as these is actually a way to calm a little bit what's going on otherwise. And I also feel that having conversations early, as Nicole was reminding us of, is important because you don't do it in a rush. And in my personal life experience, I've been a private pilot for many years, and I learned that you can only deal with one or two things at the same time. Anything more does not work. And when you're facing illness, that's exactly where you are. You are in a, not necessarily in a crisis, but you're facing serious situations. If you have too many things to do at any one time, you get swamped and you start panicking, which is not a good thing. So advanced planning makes a lot of sense for many, many reasons. I've realized, actually, listening to Nicole, that I need to do that again.
Yeah, speaking of doing it again, that's very important. I think one of the things that would help take any fear or misgivings people have is to realize this is something to improve their lives. This is not the death knell. This is so their lives can be complete and happy. I'm very, very fortunate in the fact that I spent 18 years in the development office at Cancer Care, and I have, of course, came in contact with many, many fine social workers. Pardon me. And I learned just by being there, many people were living with cancer. So 4.5 years ago, when I was diagnosed with my esophageal cancer, I didn't look at it as a death issue by any means. It was just something that had to be dealt with. Regarding advanced care, part of my personal and professional career is to plan, to help people with their plans, to put down what's important to them, to get a plan in place, the healthcare proxy, et cetera. So I had done that already. That wasn't an issue for me when I did have to come to the hospital and did have to hear, along with my husband, as clearly as possible what was in store regarding the actual procedures for the cancer. But what I'm left with really is that this is something for your life, to make your life comfortable, so that you know when you're in that MRI or wherever you are, your plan is in place. Your loved one or your friend is watching over you pretty much, and letting the physician, letting your healthcare team do what they need to do. You've taken care of the personal wishes.
Very good. And as Nicole mentioned, this is an iterative process. Today I have certain plans. I'm a planner. I make a list. On the weekend I remake that list because I didn't get to everything on the list. I'm interested to hear when you sat down to decide who might be your healthcare proxy, and you had the conversation with them, how did that go? Were they resistant? Were they totally on your side? I'm interested. I think sometimes we think, as we would say, you have a healthcare agent choice, you've chosen them. They need to know, obviously, what your wishes are, otherwise what's the point? How did that conversation go? Do you recall?
Yeah, well, the reality is that you fill some of these papers as papers. You do that as you do other things, as you do a will, So to be honest, I didn't give the proxy its right value at the time, because it was just a document. The conversations came later, and conversations are ongoing. Ideally, you would want to have a dedicated conversations as you sign the proxy, but that's not what I did. That's what I should have done, but that's not what I did. But this being said, things change also. Things are not the same all the time. So you may agree on something, or you may decide that you want something at a certain time, and later on things change for whatever reason. So it's also important to remember that it's more of an ongoing conversation than a one-time event.
Very much.
Again, definitely ongoing conversation. I'm very fortunate that my husband and I share very similar feelings and similar ways of doing things, but there are just the two of us. We don't have children. We have siblings, but now our siblings are about our age, so we really have been looking at the younger generation. We have lots of nieces and nephews we're very close to. We trust them. But then they have families that they really need to give their attention to. So although we do have our paperwork in place, we're looking again, and we may well decide to go to someone outside, an attorney, and take that burden off. It's not always flattering to tell someone, we trust you with everything, you're in charge. That's not always a favor. And again, this could change as my husband and I progress in our lives, in our ages, and feeling well. Nieces and nephews, their children are growing, they may have more time, but it's also important to look at people who are close by, who's in your state, who's nearby. So a lot of things to take into account. But again, it's a living document, we're living, and we need to take a look at it every couple years and make adjustments. And we did have conversations with our sisters and brothers and told them that, they were where they were in the order, and that would be fine. But now again, okay, we're all getting a bit older and have other things going on in our lives. So we're blessed. We truly are blessed with a very strong family.
Very good. I'm wondering, all of us who are nurses or physicians, we are that healthcare provider to our neighbors and our friends. Sometimes we take off the hat and we are the brother, sister, mother, dad. And I've had these conversations with my family, and they expect me to be the healthcare provider, and I tell them clearly, we're on the same playing field here as we discuss that. We think about what your wishes might be if things didn't go in the right direction with treatment, and of course we enter treatment with high hopes. But when those treatments maybe don't work like we have thought they would, and our goals maybe change a little bit, and we start thinking about what's really important to us. I want to hear what's important to you when we're having that conversation, and I suppose that changes and is quite fluid over life. When you sat with your agent that you've chosen and you talk about your wishes and expect that they're going to listen to your wishes and convey those wishes to us if you're unable to. How do you decide what's important to you?
Well, what's important comes, in my case, and I think it's also a reminder that all patients are different, and there is not one rule which applies to everyone. We all react differently. And of course, when you face cancer, you have to think about mortality. And the way I thought about it myself was to say, well, if I don't make it through this, what am I going to miss the most? And I gave myself just one option. I could only say one thing I would miss. And it was at the time not seeing my grandchildren grow up. So there are things like this which are not necessarily related to treatments per se, or to life choices, or to decisions, but which are really important in terms, the word meaning was used, in terms of what life means to you at a given time. And again, that will be something very different from most people. So I think it's important to have context as well. Beyond the actual decisions, what is the context and why is it there? And again, mortality, there is always a bit, cancer and mortality are words which children in particular avoid. I can have these conversations with my wife. When we start talking about things like this with our children, who are way grown up now, they run away. They don't want to hear it because they're scared in terms of what that means to them as well. So sometimes we also have to think of the impact we create when we hold these conversations, because they're more uncomfortable for other people than they are for us. For us, you actually deal with it. You know where you are. You're in relative control. Others are not, and are uneasy with the whole issues.
What I'm thinking, what is important to me, what I've learned in my life, I think what is most important to leave to people to fulfill my personal wishes really is just to keep the faith, to not be afraid to visit people who are ill. Don't be afraid of the word cancer. Listen to how the person is feeling. It's okay. I could go on and on about that, but just to be honest with yourself, and be honest with your loved ones or your trusted healthcare proxy, and have the discussion. And if you feel they cannot deal with it, that's just important for you to know, and to find someone, perhaps just an impartial third person, but someone who will fulfill your wishes the way you want. It's your life, and you should be happy and have things your way, whatever the amount is or not is, or whatever. It's your life.
Very good. So when you think about, again, what's important to you, your legacy, what's the cards being dealt to you, look at the word cloud then there. Is there something that particularly stands out that you might want to then share with others who are considering having these conversations? Or is there something missing?
No, all the words are there. I mean, clearly, again, it will depend. Everyone will react differently. Love, obviously, family is generally going to be there. Quality of life is very important, because when we talk about these issues, it really has to do with quality of life. Actually, losing quality of life, certainly for me, is more important than mortality itself. I mean, mortality, we're all going to die. That's not news in itself. So you deal with it, but that's, it's just the timing which might change. But quality of life, having a poor quality of life, has many other implications. And that part is something which actually needs more focus than the final outcome. What happens in between? How do you go through this? That's to me, that's the important part in these words.
Yeah, I think I really would want my family members, people, friends, etc., to know I would not want to be doted over. I would not want to feel like they're sitting there because they have to. I certainly would want to be kept clean and comfortable. well fed if that's appropriate, if I'm at that stage where nutrition is necessary. But I would want to know that they would feel free to leave as well. I don't want them to feel, wouldn't want them to feel tethered to me in any way.
So back to why we're here in education and inspiring and pushing a little bit of why don't we all have advanced care plans in some form of record. I think about, obviously, decisions that we make depend on our education and our context, as Jean-Claude mentioned. As you think about control, I'm a control freak. I think it's hard sometimes to give up that control. Part of the advanced directive then would be keeping that control, it would seem, and alerting whomever what our wishes might be. Do you have some advice for those who haven't filled out a form, because we can do that immediately after this? Again, decreasing the fear, the control piece, the education, the knowledge that even the implication that this implies you're having a conversation with friends, family, loved one that you might not otherwise have had, and maybe what that means to them.
I think control is important. When you have control, you decrease the level of stress and you decrease anxiety. So, and there are various ways to have control. One of the ways to get some level of control is to get access to information. I certainly found when I went through diagnosis and the whole process, having access to doctors at Mount Sinai, for that matter, that were willing to share information, provide me with the information I required, guide me to some readings I could take. This was really significant. So access to proper information helps, because you can then ask the right questions. And the lack of information gets you isolated in reverse, which is not what people want. I mean, when you're facing illness, that's a big risk. You can be very isolated, and you need to have conversations, but sometimes opportunities are not there. Many people are not comfortable with talking about their illness, and as a result, they isolate themselves. I found that I talk quite a bit about it, which was probably therapeutic in my case as well. But I found that when sharing with other people, friends I trusted without imposing my illness on them, they were actually appreciative, because it forced them to think about issues which they probably never thought about, and realize that they could actually address and deal with. So sometimes we have to find the right level of communication. Too much is putting people in a position where they're going to be uncomfortable, and obviously we should not do that. Not enough, you're actually withholding information which is in no one's best interest.
I think for me, simplicity is the key word. When I was diagnosed and then going through treatment and all, I was very, very tired and just not really able to focus all that well on reading, and just trusted what people were telling me. So I did not get that involved in research. I just kind of accepted. I said, okay, Jean-Claude is a pilot. If I go for a ride in his plane, I'm not going to tell him how to fly the plane. I'm just going to trust that he knows where we're going. He's going to get me there. And that was very much the feeling I had with my healthcare team at Beth Israel. I also would encourage people, just write down your thoughts even before you do that form. Put your thoughts down, and nothing is silly. I was so relieved. During my time with I had never been in the hospital for anything, no children, no broken bones, no nothing, so that when I did go to the hospital, I was far more afraid of spending a week in the hospital than I was of the cancer. And just the calmness and the serenity and the clarity, and speaking to me in just very simple words. If they were going to test something or do something, just keep it very simple. And I think that's how I feel as well about making my wishes known, is just to keep it really simple and just take the fear away.
You mentioned self-awareness. I guess kind of an ongoing theme. If we don't know ourselves, how can we convey to others what we want? I think that's very important. thinking of those who have not set and had a proxy form filled and have not chosen a healthcare agent, do you have some quick advice just for moving forward, knowing that this is Healthcare Decisions Day and Healthcare Decisions Week, that we are all here to help sign those forms and immediately after this conversation? Some quick words of wisdom or advice to all of us.
I think spreading the news, sharing the information. Actually, within my work context, we're doing a blog and a number of things, and they've asked me to provide some information about today. So I'm going to use that to communicate with people in various fields, people who are in business, or and just share that particular information. So I think it's a matter, the more we talk about it, the more results we'll have. And it has to come from experience. I think it's more powerful if you can say it's valuable to me, it was valuable to me, and then people sort of take the endorsement.
Yeah, definitely. And I think being just realistic about what your concerns, because most of us, we find plenty of time to do the things that are fun, but we don't find the time to do the things that make us a little uncomfortable. So I think just face your fear, a term I learned from the great social work team, put a name on it, and just be in control, take charge of it. Just be simple, get your wishes down. They can always be refined, they can always be changed. But just once you open that door, once you know the route you want to take, you'll just feel better and move forward with it.
And I think from an education point of view, again, coming from the Mount Sinai Health System, you never know whose lives you touch. Anything you talk about, anyone you come in contact with, they may not seem to be listening, but they might be, and you just never know. I think it's very important to live what's important, share that knowledge, the self-awareness. I journal every day. I think it's very important and then later you think, what was I thinking when I wrote that? But to know yourself, to help with the education, we all should be having these conversations when we're young and strong. And I welcome you all to open up the conversation if anyone has some questions. It's Healthcare Decisions. Yes?
It's not a question, but it's something that I found useful, and maybe you already know it, but at some point I wanted to fill out a proxy and find an agent, and I went on the website, the Conversation Project, and they do have a guideline for the conversation, not for filling out papers, but it gives you some ideas of what questions you can ask and what kind of conversation you want to have. And they have it in several languages, so I printed some for my family and friends, and I just gave them out, and I filled it out with my agent. We went through all the questions, and we kind of exchanged our answers, and that really helped to fill the proxy.
And the website was what?
The Conversation Project.
Conversation Project. I shouldn't probably open questions because the microphone may not be sounding there. A lot of stuff, a lot of help. We're very social savvy, we're very internet savvy, we're very able to explore opportunities for having conversations. It's iterative. It is ongoing. It changes. Our focus changes. Our lives change, obviously. Our age changes. So there are a lot of reasons why we need to reevaluate and readdress and be self-aware. Thank you all so much for coming today. And from the Enterprise, happy National Healthcare Decisions Week. Thank you.